It's not me. All right. And we both got books in the background too.
We're the professors right now.
Yes. Hey, Marisa.
Hey, Tamsen.
So I'm relaunching as a video podcast. So I told you I'm still getting my groove, but I'm going to let you do a quick introduction of yourself in a second. This is part 1 of our third conversation. I'm inviting all the people back that I love to have on. We are talking about success and struggles people have feeling successful. And we're going to start talking about values, which is cool. So we'll get there. We got a couple things to do first, right? I'd like you to give your kind of brief intro, a little bit about who you are, and then we will celebrate something.
Ooh, yay, I love celebrations. So I'm Marissa, and I'm a playful parenting coach and yoga teacher and board certified genetic counselor. I'm American, but we live in France. So whole lots of chaos and like out of the comfort zone and adaptation that I've had to do, including in personally and professionally. And so a big part of my business is working with parents and children who feel mentally and physically exhausted from trying to do it all, get it done, and adapt to a life that feels like out of their control. So I'm all about helping people be connected with who they are meant to be, to see their relationship with their children as co-creations that they get to, so they can stop shooting on themselves and really start to create that connection and make heart-led decisions together in partnership, so they can create more joy and ease in a more balanced life together.
Cool. Sounds fun.
I'm excited to celebrate with you because I know what you're celebrating. Sorry.
Yes.
I'm jumping ahead.
I am jumping ahead. So, so what do you want to celebrate today?
So I want to celebrate, actually, we are going home for 6 weeks this summer, which, it's been 3 years since we've been back to the US because of this crazy pandemic world. And so we just today were mapping out who we were going to see and when we were going to see and like what our route is going to be. And yeah, I'm celebrating that because it's always hard to pack and go on vacation. This feels easier than it has before because it's filled with so much gratitude that we can actually get on a plane and do this safely. So,
cool.
Or as safely as possible.
Congratulations. That's a good thing.
Yeah, it's hard to live 5,000 miles away. So.
Well, I haven't seen my mom in about the same amount of time, and she lives a 45-minute drive away. So just the not being able to see people is hard, but when it's such an ordeal to travel as well, that's a whole other layer of not so fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, that's good. I hope you have a really great time.
Yeah, I'm excited. How about you?
Yes, and I hate that when I see it on Zoom. Can you see? Is it?
It's correct. Yeah. Okay. It's in the right orientation.
It's not for me, and I'm like, oh. But yes, I have. So this is not the final version, but it's so nice to just get a print version of my upcoming book and just feel it. So the paradox of success. Woohoo! So we are talking about a topic kind of related to that, and I don't know when this is going to air, but if it airs before June 25th, people can come to I'm having a launch party. So I know it's a little bit, since your time zone is ahead, it's going to be a little late for you, I think, but 1 to 3 my time. So
I will plan to be there in the beginning part of it.
Okay. I haven't even planned exactly what the event's going to be, but I am calling it a launch party. It's meant to be informal. It's virtual. I can't offer drinks or treats or anything like that, but not food wise anyway, but I'm going to try and I want to celebrate with people. It's been a lot of work, but it's also been a long time since I've felt like, let's have a party.
Right.
Yeah. So that's cool.
And I'm very excited because obviously, like you, I love books. And so I'm excited to have the book on my shelf here in France.
Awesome. I see even a little bits of orange there. You'll probably be able to slot it in somewhere.
Yes, it'll fit in very nicely amongst the yellow books over here and the orange. Right next to Eckhart Tolle.
Cool. All right. So we're starting a conversation around values, right? Because it was part of the book. You're reading my book for me. You're giving me some feedback. Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody who's helped, because for anyone who's done a project like this, whether it's, through academia or writing you read your own stuff so many times, you stop seeing what's actually there, and you also know what you meant. So yeah. So it's very helpful to have other eyes and feedback from people. So that's another thing I'm grateful for. I guess I'm just gratitude all over the place today.
Yeah.
But we were talking a bit about how important it is to just know what your values are, to dig into what they actually are, and how it's related to success. So how do you want to start that? Where does that lead you to?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that I really love about that you share in the book, and it's a big part of, sort of laying the foundation with my clients, is having the conversation about values. And when you and I were talking earlier, and you talk about this in the book, like it's easy to be like, oh, my values are X, Y, and Z, right? Like communication and connection and honesty, like whatever you lay it out, whatever they are for you, or to have this sort of list to choose from. But it's not always clear to other people what you mean by those values. Yeah. And so you go through this exercise of like, all right, let's define what freedom means, or let's define what connection means. Let's define what tolerance means. Because you could, when you're in relationship with other people, whether it's your somebody in your family or somebody in your community, if you're just putting that word out there, or even as a business owner, when you're working on your business values, how you communicate them is based on what your definition is. And so if somebody else has a different definition, then it's not going to land in the same way. And so I love this, because the other thing that you and I are very good at is being analytical. We've got our academic backgrounds, right? Like, and part of what happens, I think, when, like you were just saying with the book, is what you meant to say, and what you thought you said, and what's there. And so you can get into the habit of talking about your values, but not actually knowing what you mean. Like, what you know, but you don't actually know how to describe it to, when you stay in genetic counseling, like, how would you say that to a 9-year-old? Right. So that, so it just can create a lot of tension and a lot of struggles and a lot of, frustration, because you're actually not, you think you're on the same page with somebody, but you're not, because you're using the same word, but not the same definition. Yeah.
And one of the main advantages, like, we're supposed to talk about the benefits of something as, business people, right? And trying to get people to read the book is important. So one of the benefits I really see to doing the work in the book, which is to create your own personal definition of success. Part of that is connecting with your values. One of the benefits, like, why on earth would I care about creating my own personal definition of success? It helps you make decisions that you're happier with more quickly and easily. And our values, people often think of decision-making as this analytical process, but it's a very emotional process, really, if you look at the neuroscience and all this. But when you are connected with your values are what I think your emotions help connect your values to your decisions.
Yes.
So knowing emotionally that you are very drawn to a particular decision, sometimes that's enough. Sometimes you don't actually need to dig into your values. But if you're having trouble making a decision and you don't know what your values actually are, you may not have an easy time distinguishing from, well, what part of this decision-making process connects me to my values? Which part of it is just trying to please everybody?
Yeah.
Which part of it is because of things I've been told I should want, right?
Yeah.
So,
and I think a tangible example of that, like in parenting, for example, is also like when something isn't going right, Like, and often when the thing that is that most commonly doesn't go right in parenting is communicating with your child, and feeling like, they have some behavior that you are trying to control or shift or deal with, and they aren't responding. And as I started digging into like my value work in my own parenting, when I was very clear about what were the values I wanted to instill in my children, and you and I talked about, like, I can't control if my children develop those values, but what are the values I want to role model with the intention of, them seeing what's important to me and living in alignment with myself and my values. I could start to see how the behaviors that triggered me, or that I was trying to that I was trying to control, were actually exactly what I wanted my children to become, right? Like, they're like, for example, the classic example is like independent, right? Like, I want my children to be independent thinkers as adults and to be critical thinkers. But if I ask them what they want for dinner, or if I ask them to clean their room, like, I mean, do it now, right? Like, I don't want them to like actually sit and think about, like, when am I going to do that chore that mom just asked me to do, right? Like, and so they're like, I want them to be, and I wanted them to be yes men. I have 2 boys, so I'm going to use those pronouns. I wanted them to be yes men and to do what I wanted them to do, but yet that's not teaching them to make independent decisions.
you want them to be that way, but only to you.
But only to me, and only when they're children. And then when they turn 18, and like go out into their own, like, they have to be independent. And so when I was able to see that, it was much easier to then recognize that I was fighting a battle that I actually didn't want to fight.
Yeah.
And I was expending energy and getting frustrated for something that was actually, because I was actually out of alignment, and on a soul level, or on like, some subconscious level, I knew I was out of alignment and my kids were, picking up on that. So it allowed me to also shift what I needed to do, and who I needed to be, so that I could actually be living by the values I wanted to instill with them. And this comes up in my business too, right? You and I talked about like wanting, to have a business that allowed us the freedom to do certain things, or to have certain things in our life. And it's like, if we don't know what those things are that we want to have, then it's like, it makes it a whole, and it's like, well, I just want my business to like make, I just want to feel freedom in my business. And it's like, well, I don't feel free when I'm tied down to my computer writing that blog post that I don't want, like, that I don't know what I'm writing, or staring at a blank screen. So it doesn't feel free to be doing the things I don't want to do. And so, define, and this is kind of what you talk about in the book too, as part of defining that success. It's like, when you're in alignment with like, what do the words actually mean? Then it's like, oh, right, like, freedom to me means having a business that is actually making some money, or at least making enough money to break even with what I'm spending, or to, to create enough, whatever that definition for people, or spending time with my family, being able to pick up my kids from school. Those are things that that to me mean freedom. So then I can align with that and sit down and write the blog post and not feel like it's infringing on my free time. And yeah, you know, so I really appreciated that in the book. What I also like about what you do in the book, because talking about your values and talking about and defining your values can feel really uncomfortable. It can, and we often, as you and I talk about too, like when we feel uncomfortable, when we're triggered, our instinct can be like, oh, shiny object, let me go over there. And so the questions and the way that you lay it out, and the workbook style of the book throughout the book, it's a book of questions, like you said.
Yeah.
it gives some structure, but they're not like, it doesn't feel like someone's breathing down your neck. The questions are really open and feel like they're deep, and there's also some ease to it, because it's like you can just get to respond to the question instead of having to try and figure it out from scratch on your own.
Yeah, I say it's a book of questions. I'm not giving you the answers. I'm giving you the questions you need to ask to find your own answer. Right. And I think that's like, I can say one thing that I found it's really helpful to connect with your values. I have found it really helpful. Maybe some people won't, but I think it's probably a good thing to try. But I'm not going to tell people what values they need to choose.
Right.
Because that needs to be their choice. But I do think it's more useful, like we've talked about, dig into what those values actually mean to you. Because the definition or the example, I think I've used it in the book, is family. Two people, and I know I've said this before, but it wasn't on the recording, so sorry, I'm putting it again.
I will listen to it again.
But family, two people can say they love family, and one person that means they spend all the time that they can with their family, and to the other person it means they're spending all the time at work because they're making money to support their family and meet their family's needs. And those two people, I don't think it's right to say one of them actually values family and the other doesn't. But what it actually means and how it shows up in their life is different. Yeah. Right. And I think that it's worth, though, listening to yourself and digging into that, and what part of that do you want more of in your life? Maybe the person who spends a lot of time with their kids would like to have more financial ease in their life so they can do more stuff and have more experiences that cost money. There's a lot of cool experiences that don't cost money, but there's a lot of cool experiences that do cost money. And the person who, you can tell which way I'm biased, the person who spends all their time at work might want to actually spend more time with their family. But yeah. So that is, if I said family isn't actually one of my top two values for me right now, our values can change when our lives change and we grow. I believe we grow our entire life. But it's, I forget what I was going to say, but because another thought popped into my head, and I definitely say this in the book too. It really hurts sometimes to cross some of the values off and say it's not one of my top two. And family, I winced when I had to say, no, I'm not going to say family, because I spend a lot of time. I think I've said one of the benchmarks for success in my business is that I have the time to be there for my son when he needs me.
Right.
And yet it didn't show up as one of my top values. And so, creating a life that you want to live has a whole bunch of different parts and a whole bunch of different moving pieces, and it doesn't always look the same. Yeah. But I really do think that connecting with your values and figuring out what they are makes decision making a lot easier. Exactly like you were saying, you can look at a situation and say, I'm struggling to figure out what the quote unquote right thing to do is, what I'm going to choose to do. I'm struggling to figure out what to choose to do. And when you know what you want, how you want to show up, it can make that a lot easier, because a lot of us, I don't know if there's any adult person who doesn't have some sort of big T or little t trauma. So things can trigger us and we can go into, I tend to want to disappear. I tend to want to appease people when I'm triggered like that. And I'm like, okay, no, I got to stand up for what I believe in and not disappear. Yeah. That's one reason why I like orange. I started liking orange when I actually started not wanting to be invisible anymore. It's a whole thing. But yeah, it's so valuing family can mean something different. You mentioned freedom. Like freedom to somebody might just mean I can drop whatever, whenever, go off and do whatever I want. If somebody has little kids, freedom hopefully means something different to them, or they're not going to have a lot of it, probably.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying about, giving yourself permission to let your values change. And so, coming back to this exercise on a semi-regular basis, whatever that looks like for you, because I was talking to a client who's also a friend who recently had a baby, and she was saying, her child just got sick for the first time, and she was like, oh, this is what parents were talking about. Right? Like beforehand, she was like, always very empathic and understanding when people, would have to cancel business meetings or something because their child was sick. But having never experienced it, she had never, it didn't play into how she organized her time. Right. And so now that she's experiencing it and recognizing like, oh yeah, like there is a chance that the daycare is going to call and say, you have to come pick him up. And what do I do in that moment? Or, that a piece of her brain is in that, like glued to her phone, right? Like maybe the phone will ring, so I can't be 100% focused in my business. So like now she's learning how to ground herself so that she can, be in her business without being distracted by, is the phone going to ring? Like, what are the things she wants to put in place with her husband to make sure that like there's always somebody covering the phone just in case, but that like, she doesn't have to like disconnect a piece of her brain from her work. She can focus. And so it's shifting how she's doing her work. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't necessarily mean, because we weren't having a conversation about values in that situation, but I think it resonates with what you're saying, because there are always these transitions in our lives. I think none of us were, ready or anticipating COVID when you and I had our first conversation on your podcast on that first day, everything shut down. Like, we're sort of like, what's this going to look like? Nobody really knew. And it became this sort of like, for us in our house, it was almost like every 3 months that we had to reevaluate our values and reevaluate how we were doing things. And because there were always things shifting, right? Yeah. And so it happened to us in COVID, but I think it was happening beforehand, and we just weren't conscious of, and we weren't consciously having those conversations about the values, because we could sort of go about our life and until there was like a chaotic moment where we had to reevaluate. Now, one of the lessons, I think one of the silver linings for me has been this like reconnecting to my values, giving myself permission to know that what is my value today might not be my value in 3 months or 6 months. My values in my business might be different than my values for my family. And so when I'm thinking about success, that could change. My definition of success today might not be my definition of success tomorrow, because my values of today might not be my values of tomorrow. So it adds a little bit more chaos. And my husband's an astronomer who, makes his profession like his profession is like because of chaos, right? Like our universe is here or our planet is here because of chaotic movement in the universe. And yet he's also somebody who likes to control the chaos in his daily life. So we were just having this conversation about that. Like his value in his business is like, let's make things chaotic, right? Like, let's see what happens if we like, you know, because he studies planet formation. Let's see what happens if we add more junk into this like model, and how do planets form if there's more junk in the system. But at home, it's like, wait, what? There's like there's a birthday party on Saturday, and the routine is going to change because we have to navigate how to get this kid here and that kid there, and so it's really interesting because, again, like I think one of the things I love about the way that your book is laid out is it's a book you can keep coming back to, and the values question is a exercise that you can keep coming back to. And it also, even though the book is meant, you know, really for you know, your target audience being women, I think it's a really good starting place for your readers to see how they can start having conversations with people around them, whether that's as a business owner who is managing a team, or whether it's a mom managing a family or a dad managing a family. I think that these are the questions allow a framework or a blueprint to not only think about what is my definition of success, but to start having that conversation so that, you know, you were saying like society says this is how you should define success, but for you don't define the like success the same way. And so there's this sort of pushback from society and yet I think what we're learning is that we all have different definitions of success. And your book does create this place to start having those conversations. So
you've given me about 5 more book ideas. I already had a whole bunch of more book ideas, but it would be cool to write a workbook or a book to how to scaffold a parent to teach their kids how to get around all the stuff they've been told, except parents are one of the voices that tell their kids stuff. So we'll have to
but even how to have that conversation, knowing as the parent that your kid might not have the same responses that you have. I would love to partner on that book with you. Let's write that book.
All right, let's write that book. Let's pause here because I've got a question I want to ask you, and I'm like, it's a good question and we need to have a part 2. So let's say goodbye for now. And we're gonna, for everyone listening, if you're listening to part 1, part 2 will likely be released in a week, but 1 second and we get to have another conversation.